Hey, you history students. Today we're going to jump into the 1960s, and we're going to be talking about some of the equality movements that happened in the 1960s and a little bit of the Vietnam War, very briefly. Okay, the first equality movement we're going to talk about is the Women's Liberation Movement. Now, this was led by a lady named Betty Friedan. You remember her name? And she helped create the National Organization of Women. It's called NOW. The National Organization of Women believed that women were just as capable as men. They should be permitted to compete for the same jobs. They should make the same amount of money. And so the NOW group, led by Betty Friedan, is fighting for women's rights in the 1960s. Women also got a win as far as women's rights are concerned with the passage of Title IX. Title IX was a law that banned sex discrimination in educational institutions. So it gave girls the same opportunities as boys in educational settings. So if we take a look before Title IX, about 1 out of every 27 girls played a varsity sport. That's high school, college. And now 1 out of 2.5 play varsity sports. So you see lots more participation in sports by girls. Another equality movement that came out of Oakland was known as, or is known as, the Black Panthers. And this was looking for rights for African Americans. They used weapons to protect themselves against the police. They created a 10-point plan demanding greater opportunities and benefits for African Americans. And they fought for African American rights. Next is the Chicano movement. The Chicano movement is going to be looking for equality for Mexican Americans. Main focus of the Chicano movement was farm workers' rights, migrant workers, farm workers, giving them better pay, better working conditions, more equality. 3 people you need to remember is Hector Perez Garcia, Cesar Chavez, and Dolores Huerta. Now, Hector Perez Garcia was a veteran of World War II. He fought for Mexican Americans' soldiers' rights. Cesar Chavez, who you see in the picture right here, he organized migrant farm workers. He fought for workers' rights, organized boycotts, so tried to get people to stop buying certain products if those companies were not treating Mexican-American workers correctly. And then Dolores Huerta, she was another Mexican-American labor leader, so she's like the girl version of Cesar Chavez. She organized strikes in labor and boycotts and worked closely with Chavez. The next equality movement was for American Indians, Native Americans. It's called the American Indian Movement, or AIM. This movement tried to gain favorable public opinion towards Native Americans, to try to gain greater respect for their heritage. They felt like their heritage had been disrespected by the United States for a long time, by public opinion, by people. They introduced the name or the term Native American instead of Indian. And they protested against things that showed an anti-American Indian bias, like textbooks or TV shows or movies. Anything that showed Native Americans in a negative light, or in a light that showed them as being primitive or dumb or things like that, they would protest against those things. They even had marches and movements and occupied government monuments on Alcatraz Island and Wounded Knee, South Dakota, to try to gain recognition for the AIM cause, the American Indian Movement cause. Youth are also gaining rights in the 1960s. We come to the 26th Amendment. 26th Amendment moves the voting age down from 21 to 18. And so kind of the slogan, the slogan for the giving younger people the right to vote is, if they're old enough to fight, old enough to join the military, old enough to be drafted, they should be old enough to vote for the politicians who are going to draft them and send them into war. Okay, now we're going to get into several important court cases that you need to know and remember. The first court case we're going to talk about is Mendez versus Westminster School District. This was in 1947, and it was in California. Basically, what had happened was Mexican-American school children were being segregated. And so their parents challenged the segregation in court, and the district court ruled that it was a violation of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Equality Protection Clause. They weren't gaining equality. By being segregated, they weren't equal. And so the court said that segregation of children of a group was illegal unless there was a special state law requiring it. So now Mexican-American children in California have equal rights and are integrated. The next court case is in Texas, Delgado versus Bastrop ISD, 1948. So this is 1 year after Mendez. It's based on the Mendez decision. So the Texas Attorney General says, hey, we have segregation of Mexican-American students in Texas. They said it was illegal in California. We should challenge this in Texas. And so they sued Bastrop ISD for segregating Mexican-Americans. And the U.S. District Court, agreed that the segregation of a group of the same race was illegal. So Mexican-Americans and whites, they say, are both Caucasian in race. And so you can't separate out one group if they're both the same race. Another Texas court case that makes its way to the Supreme Court in 1954 is known as Hernandez versus Texas. Now, Hernandez was a guy that was on trial for murder, and he was convicted of murder. His issue, though, was that he was convicted by a jury of all whites. There was no Hispanics on the jury. There's no Mexican-Americans, just like Hernandez was Mexican-American. Because Mexican-Americans weren't allowed on juries in the county where he was from. So Hernandez appealed this ruling, his conviction, to the Supreme Court, saying that his rights had been violated. The state of Texas argued that Mexican-Americans were white and were not entitled to any special protection, but the Supreme Court ruled that Mexican-Americans formed a separate class that was entitled to protection and that they should have allowed Mexican-Americans on the jury. So therefore he got a retrial, although he was still convicted because he was guilty. Okay, the next one is White versus Register, 1973. This one is a little complicated, so I'm going to try to explain this the best that I can. Basically what happens is the legislature in Texas, each different district or section of the state elects representatives to go to Austin and be the representative. And in 1970, they changed the district boundaries. So Dallas County and Bexar County, these are two large districts that each had several members, but they redrew the line so that minorities weren't represented like they were in the past. So if you look at my drawing down here, let's say this is a district that Texas drew. It's a square. Most districts aren't really square, but this one is. And let's say the red section in the middle of that is where a large group of Mexican Americans live. And so what the state of Texas did when they redrew the boundaries is they said, okay, we're going to create a boundary here, and we're going to create a boundary here. And so they split up the Hispanic group to now they're outnumbered in each of these 4 districts. And so now they don't really have a say in government because they're going to get outvoted by the majority. And so what Texas, or what the Supreme Court said, is that each district had to be split up. And where there's a minority group, that group had to be ruled by minorities. They had to have someone that is representing them. So if we draw a new district here, and let's put the Mexican-American group in the middle. So now it has to look something like this. So you can split off here, and you can even split off here. But one of the sections has to be a minority-majority group. So now it's 1, 2, 3, and this middle section right here is now going to be controlled by that minority group. Now they have a say in their government. Our next court case is called Edgewood ISD versus Kirby. This is 1984 in Texas. Basically, it comes down to a school district called Edgewood ISD. It was a poor district, had a large Mexican-American population, and school districts raised money, and they still do, based on property taxes. So if you are a school district and you're in a poor area, you're going to have less money raised than if you were a school district in a rich area, because the houses cost more in rich areas, therefore you get more tax money. And so what happened is the Texas Supreme Court ruled that a change must be made in the public school finance system in order to better serve poor school districts. They said that the way that they were doing it currently was not fair, and they needed to find a new way to do it. Our next court case is called Miranda versus Arizona, and you may have heard of your Miranda rights. Those come from this court case. Basically says the Supreme Court says that anybody who is a criminal and is being questioned by police must be informed of their constitutional right to an attorney and against self-incrimination. So you may have heard that when you're arrested, they'll tell you you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. So if you're being arrested, you have to be read your Miranda rights, which let you know the rights that you have as an arrested person. The next court case is Tinker versus Des Moines. And so this is in Des Moines, Iowa. There are students in Des Moines, Iowa that were against the Vietnam War. And they wanted to protest the Vietnam War by wearing these armbands, these black armbands with the peace sign on it. And so they wore them to school, but the school told them that they had to remove their armbands. And so the students worked their way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the students did not lose their rights when they attend school as long as it does not cause a disruption to the educational process. And so they said that these armbands did not cause a disruption to the educational process, therefore could be worn in school. So this is for students' free speech. As long as it does not disrupt the educational process, it is allowed.